Hi, my name is Erica, and you may know me as the creator of TsundEri, the YouTube channel about anything and everything having to do with anime. And you are also about to know me as the host of the podcast Nerds at Work with TsundEri, where I interview fellow nerds who turn their passions into thriving careers. I'm very excited to introduce my first ever guest to the podcast, Bill Masuku. Bill Masuku is an award-winning comic book artist, storyteller, and storyboard artist from Zimbabwe. He also works as an assistant editor for Kugali Media, a Pan-African comic, animation, and AR company that recently collaborated with Disney Plus for the animated series Iwaju. The story of Iwaju takes place in Nigeria and will premiere sometime this year. Bill's most notable works include the comics Captain South Africa and Razorman, and back in September, Bill announced he's joined Netflix and Triggerfish for a top secret project. And your resume is very extensive. How are you, Bill?
I'm good. It's always surprising to hear stuff I've done. So yeah. How are you
I'm
doing?
all right. Did I get all of that right?
Yeah, I mean most of it. I
Most of
mean we,
it?
we can course correct in the copy, so
If there's anything that I messed up, please let me know.
no, it's all good. It's all good. It's all
Awesome.
good.
So I told you this earlier. You are my first ever guest on the podcast.
Yeah.
So you are the first person who I'm going to ask this question that I will be asking all of my guests in the future, which is, what does being a nerd mean to you? For me, it means being really passionate about something, and no matter what it is, and getting so excited that it consumes your time. Whenever someone brings it up, you're just so hyped to go on and on and on about it. That's what it means to me, and just being really passionate about something. So what does being a nerd mean to you?
I would say similar. I think the conversation about like what is the difference between like a geek and a nerd and otaku comes up like quite frequently, especially like when you start getting into your fandom, right? And I think it's important that like nerd isn't just like anime, gaming, TV, etc. They're sports nerds. They're
Yes.
people who are really focused on the statistics, who played last season, oh they changed the uniforms for whatever reason, and it's that specificity of knowledge that makes you excited about whatever your piece of entertainment you're enjoying, whether it's book, game, TV, tech, etc. And so yeah, like passion at the forefront, but like a deep, I don't want to say obsessive, but like a deep uh, compelling passion. Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely agree. There are sports nerds, there are car nerds, there are, there's so many things to be passionate about. And I love seeing people who have like this really niche interest and they're so excited about it. There's just something about seeing someone talk about something and their face lights up. I'm like, yes, you're a nerd. You're a nerd about something that maybe I don't understand, but you're a nerd. And I like that. Um, so that brings me to my next question. So I did a lot of research on you leading up to this interview because I like to be prepared, and I gathered that from previous interviews that I saw, I gathered that you started drawing and writing your own stories when you were as young as being like the fourth or fifth grade, right?
Yeah.
And but you actually didn't see your first comic until you were midway through high school. So my
Yeah.
question is like, do you remember the first story that you wrote as a kid, and do you remember the first comic that you saw?
Uh, the first comic that I wrote was called Bill Saga, very self-centered, yeah. And then the first comic that I like held and read, I think it was Uncanny X-Men. I can't tell you what issue it was, but there was like a rubbery guy on the cover. It was, and the paper was like closer to newsprint rather than what it is today when you hold a
Oh,
comic.
so definitely had to be much older
So
then.
yeah, it was definitely not like um the year it came out that the year I read it. It was definitely like someone's soapbox somewhere, and it happened onto my desk. That's what it happened.
So when you were drawing, like what made you want to explore storytelling? Like, I guess, how did you become a nerd for comics?
That anime, that was my gateway into it. So the first anime I ever saw was Samurai X. I was going to use the Japanese name, but I'm not trying to butcher it. I know fans will
I
come.
know what you're talking about.
Um, all right. And after that, it was just like I had seen cartoons before. Obviously, I'm a child. Like that's what we do. But there was something different about like sequential storytelling, where it was like, oh, the story didn't wrap up after 20 minutes. And I was like, okay, where's the rest? Then I came back the next day and the next day and the next day. But for whatever licensing agreement rules they were at the time, we didn't have the episodes in order. We didn't have all of the episodes, so I saw like two episodes of one arc and then one of like the finale of another arc. So I'm like, when did he learn that ability? Um, and then after that, it was just a whole bunch of like small brushings off with like different types of storytelling, books, games, etc. Which is, it made me fall in love with things like Final Fantasy, where I was like, yeah, I'm playing a game, but like I'm really invested in these characters' lives. And eventually, I was like, I want to tell my own story, because these are great, but like I don't always see myself in stories. Like definitely like 90s cartoons and earlier, like there's like four, characters and then there's the black character. And regardless of what they are, you have to identify with them. I've only played basketball for like 2 years. It's not my thing. Also, I don't do like
Yeah,
high
there was
top
like a time
hair.
where every like 90s black character had the same haircut. They all played basketball. Yeah, and
Tragic.
it's like that does not relate to all of us. Um,
It doesn't.
it's funny that you brought up Samurai X and like, the storytelling with anime, because I also like, again, in my research, I saw that you had mentioned your relationship with anime was really interesting to me, because when I first started watching anime, I was really young, and I remember realizing like, okay, this is a cartoon, but it's different, and I didn't know how to explain that it was different. I just knew it was different visually, and I also knew it was different in terms of storytelling. But you nailed it, because a lot of Western cartoons were very episodic, where there was no
Mm.
real for the longest time there was no real overarching plot. It was, just different situations wrapped up at the end of an episode, and the next episode happens and we just forget about what happened before then, right? And you also had mentioned in previous interviews like how the characters were very much in depth, and there's like this range of emotions that you're seeing. And I wanted to know, like, how did that influence your own storytelling?
Oh man. Um, it made it sad. I wish I told happier stories, especially when I was younger. But like, it just those are the like conflict is just how storytelling goes. You can't have like a 2 hour movie about roommates that get along for 2 hours. It's not a movie. That's a documentary. And so it got to the point where I was like, what am I actually exploring here? Because like with the first couple of books that I made, um, on this yellow paper that I found in like my mom's office, a lot of it was centered around the powers because I obviously it's flashy. I'm a child. That's what's interesting to me. But I was like, I can only do that for like two chapters. I ran into power scaling issues 2 chapters in.
Not power
Um,
scaling.
so I was like, "Where they've blown up the Earth? Where to next?" I didn't even know space travel, so I couldn't even like conjure up new planets. So I was just like, "Cool." So in the next one, they go back in time, and they have their powers taken away, and like they actually changed power systems. So they had elemental power systems first, then they had emotional power systems, and like all the characters were my friends. So I was also scared to kill off characters. Um, so I had to put them in situations that weren't death-like, but like would challenge them. And I got a lot of feedback. I got a lot of
Otherwise, you have to tell
feedback.
your friends, listen, I'm sorry, it's nothing
Yeah, you
personal.
listen. It's your time. It's your time. But yeah, a lot of the characters, because they're based off my friends, it was like, cool. I'm not starting from scratch. I'm not creating the name. I'm not giving them a backstory. I already know who they are. My readership, who are the people, already know who they are. So it was literally people just looking for themselves in characters, which was great because I was like, cool, is that how you see us? Do you not see that you're the funny friend? Like people having like epiphanies reading is like, wow, you think I'm buff? I'm like, bro, you jacked for a 7 year old. Um, yeah, so
That's really beautiful.
that's
Also, that like your Jack for 7 will remind me. I don't know if you've seen Tokyo Revengers.
of course I've seen Tokyo
That
Revengers.
when I'm like, y'all are 12 years old and just out here scrapping and
You're
got full
12.
muscles. Like, what is going on?
What are they eating? What are they eating?
What are they
What are
feed?
they putting in the
Yeah,
sushi?
like what are they feeding y'all? Too much. Oh, you had just answered one of my questions too, so that we actually kind of moved along. Um, See, this is my first time too. Um, so when we had like talked via email, you had mentioned growing up in Zimbabwe at a time where there wasn't a huge like creative industry, and I thought that was interesting because there's a lot of challenges that face people that are getting into whether it's animation or comics, like any type of like visual medium like that, especially when they're in like super saturated markets like Japan or the United States or things like that. So I wanted to know, like, how did you navigate, your craft like professionally in a place where there wasn't a huge like creative industry? Because I'm sure there are challenges in an oversaturated market, but what are some of those challenges in like maybe a market that is still growing or doesn't quite have one yet or at the time? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, I'll start. Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. You're dope. I think I'll start with the good, and then I'll pivot into the bad, just for the flow of it. So because there's like very little competition, it's very easy to just be, oh, you're the comic book guy. I don't have to market myself much further than that. Like people understand what a comic is, and there's only like I don't know 7 of us doing it professionally. Lots of people want to get into it, but obviously there's no company that hires them. So they'll get like skilled, and then it's like, what next? Um, the challenge is that because there's no local boundary or no regional boundary for what should be the apex of talent, right? So in Japan, I'm sure like everyone wants to be Ichiro Oda, One Piece, Naruto, Bleach. Those are the people you're aspiring to, right? Um, and they don't consume. Don't quote me, but they typically don't consume, a lot of external media unless they're really deep into reading. But right. And so the same thing with the States, where your apexes are your Marvel, your DC, your Image, your Dark Horse, right? And so people will be like, oh, I want to be as good as Jim Lee. I want to, be as famous as Stanley and so on and so forth. The names that are associated with the brands. But because we don't have that boundary, we have to look at both. You have to be as good as Oda writing One Piece, and you have to be as good as like Jim Lee's art. Otherwise, like we don't really like people locally don't really care unless you're hitting an international cap, right?
Mm-hmm.
Then why are you doing this? Which is it's across the board, not just with comic books, just locally. If you're not breaking records internationally, why should we care? Because there's no like group of people that are doing it really well that's like that is what really well looks like. We have to look to you, or we look to Japan or Europe, and it's tough. It's
How
tough.
do you handle that kind of pressure? That's like, because that's like the ceiling right there.
That's the roof. That's roof piece, man. It's how do I handle the pressure? I just kind of just accept that um, I'm not Jim Lee. I'll never be Jim Lee, and also accept that I won't. If most people got into Shonen Jump, they wouldn't make it, right? So I put that in the middle of my mind, but at the front of my mind, it's that there's still room to make an industry that is wholly and uniquely ours. There's no current formula for what, at least in Southern Africa, before anyone else from West, North, or Central Africa come for me. In Southern Africa, um, there is no like uniform standard for what a comic book should look like that's produced locally. So there's no word that encompasses that. So when you hear the word comic, you know color, superpowers. When you hear manga, it's probably black and white. I mean, if it's not My Hero, then it's like techniques. When you're reading European comics, I don't know, noir stuff is probably slice of life drama, but there's like not even like thematically, genre wise, style, format, the size of the book. We don't have a unique one like that. We just kind of go with what's easiest. So the lowest barriers to entry for making a comic book, which is just, I think you guys call it printer paper. I don't know what the inches is on that, but that's what the typical person uses in Southern Africa. So like working out those things and then documenting them. I think that's one of the bigger things that nobody's talking about is that a lot of what pushes an industry forward is the documentation of the industry as it goes on. Because I could say what's an American comic book size, and I don't know how many websites like comicbook.com, CBR, and so on and so forth, all have that standard format because it's been widely publicized and that information is just currently out there. So too with manga, and so too with the European standards. So enforcing the fact that we need to be me and my peers need to be not just front runners of the art, but also being able to cultivate the culture around the actual physical books and how to read them, where to get them, blah 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 blah.
Do you feel like with that pressure, there's still that bit of freedom that you have too? Because it's like, you get to, because there isn't that record or there isn't that, like, you know, what's that word? There isn't like that record that isn't that like ceiling that you get to kind of forge your own path. If that makes sense. Like you don't have to be. You may feel like you have pressure to be as good as like the DCs and the Shonen Jumps, but in terms of creativity and like the stories that you're telling, do you feel like there's a bit more freedom there because it's like you're setting a standard in a way.
Mm, 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 mm. I'll say there's both creativity and like a cultural block. So I'll do the creativity first and then the cultural block second. Um, yeah, I honestly like because there's no standardized format. When I brought out Captain South Africa the first time, it was like massive because that was the easiest thing to print on. But then after selling it, like actually packaging it and seeing people move around with it at convention, this is the biggest thing that they've bought. When all the other books that they have are like this, and I was like, it's an unwieldy format. Like you can't be in a bus and then open up the book. Like it's not convenient. And so for the next book, I just changed the size because I'm also the publisher. I'm not just the artist. So I'm like, we're changing the size. I had a meeting with myself, like right here, and so I did, and that freedom to adapt without having uh, uh, an accumulation of people already experiencing something, right? I think an example of it would be when people moved from like square TVs to like the wider 16 by 9. You can just, as the publisher here, you can just decide to change that size. And it's not even like you have to talk to, supply chains and whatnot. You just make that decision. So too with the stories. But that walks towards the cultural barrier that I was talking about because right now the world is looking at Africa like there's a spotlight on us. It's also like your stories have to be African in some way, shape, or form. But if you grew up watching anime, reading, Spider Man's, you you are what you eat. The things that inspire you become the things that you make, right? And so I like you will find a lot of like number ones or first time comic book people. I'm going to use across the continent now because I know this for a fact. No one can come for me. A lot of the number ones that you'll find will be a Superman esque story, a Spider Man esque story, a Wonder Woman esque story, because those are they're nerds who got into making their stuff, so they're just making their version of the things that they already love. And then people locally and internationally like, okay, but this is just Wonder Woman but black. That's Nubia. It's like this is just Superman but black. There's two of those already. Is there? Yes, there is a Black Batman currently. Kind of. I am not up to date. But it was like, what are you actually? And this is like an existential. You said you weren't going to ask existential question. This is like an existential question because it's like, what does it mean to make an African comic? Is it the person who makes it? Is it the content? Is it the people that you are giving it to? We're absolutely not going to talk about Black Panther today. That's let me tell you. If that's one of your
I
questions,
was
we're going to fight.
I wasn't going to talk about it. Now I'm curious. It was not
Okay.
a question.
Maybe if you invite me back, then definitely we'll have like a half an hour
For
session on
sure.
Black Panther. But um, the point of it is that there's an expectation at some point. Doesn't have to be at the beginning, but at some point someone's going to ask you, okay, but like what about our local stories? Why don't you do a historical fantasy? Why don't you talk about Shaka Zulu or any of our ancestors or traditional culture? And a lot of the answers because that's not cool to me, man. Um, and it's also tricky because unless somebody makes it cool, it won't be cool. I'm sure samurais were just it's just a job at some point in Japan, but now, like I will watch 4 samurai anime at a time. So too with ninjas, Shinto. I know a lot about Japan. For people who've never set foot on the archipelago of Japan, we know far too much about the culture
That's
and
definitely what comes with being like an otaku for sure. You're
yeah,
like,
yeah. Also, the states. I had a quiz with my friends the other day. I say friends, coworkers. I had a quiz with my coworkers the other day, and one of the questions, which was the hard question, was name the states of America. Because none of us, I think, only 2 of us have been to the states, and we were just listing them off because we watch TV. Hey, We watch TV.
This is also
Does that answer your question?
yes. This
I
is
hope it answers your question.
it does. This is a great interview. You're very like charismatic. This is great.
Thank you.
Um,
Oh my gosh.
this is wonderful. You're a great first guest for sure. Top tier. You set the bar very high. um, so and that kind of speaking of that, like, so how did you speak about like navigating your craft in that industry? Like how did you connect with other artists? Were you able to connect with other artists? Like essentially, how did you network? It's like in a growing like creative industry where you and your colleagues are kind of spearheading everything.
Um, how do you network, or how did I network? I guess when I came from uni, the first thing I did was just Google African comic, and I found like all of two things. One of them was like a children's book. No shade to children's books, but that's not what I'm about.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other person was doing stuff, but it felt like a lot of it was NDA, so I couldn't ask about it. Like I was super curious, but it was like I can't get a hold of that book. It's not a commercial book. It's like a NGO sort of book. So I was like, okay, well, I guess if no one's doing it, I have to do it. And that is a notion that like the majority of us go through, where you Google, you don't find anything, you assume you're the only person, and so you start. And so if you like Google first African comic book, there is a lot of first African comic books, because like we're just like, yes, no, I'm first. No. And then it'll be like, oh, first African superhero. Then it'll be first African female superhero, and it's like there's these things already exist. If it was like I was talking about documentation and
Mm-hmm.
preserving the international culture, it also, if you're not Googleable, that just makes it all the harder. It make it right.
Yeah, search
But
engine
eventually,
optimization is
the search
yeah.
engine
Yep.
optimization
Changed the game for a lot of
um,
people.
changed the game. And so I think, just not answering the question, but like
Mhm.
segues. I was like at a certain point, like in my career, I was like, if you Google me and you don't find me, that is absolutely my fault. I can't afford like a SEO person, but like I made sure, like now, if you Google me, you'll find me. Which is great. I had anyone who's getting started. That's my 2 cents. If you wanted free advice,
It was definitely easy
networking.
to find you and your work too. Like I just typed in your name and like a bunch of stuff, so you did a great job.
Thank you. Networking. So after that, like just watching everybody pop up with the number one, it was like, okay, well, sir, do you wanna have a conversation? Um, and Most people don't want to have a conversation because comic books is not their full time thing. With no industry, right? And that doesn't mean just the creative part, because most things are intra-industry, right? In America, I know that you have ads in your mainstream comics, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which means that there's people who are funding, and then there you got printers who specifically do this. Then you have Diamond, and they don't. None of these people make comics; it's not their thing. You just happen to be part of their supply chain, and without that multi-tier supply chain moving from raw materials all the way into marketing and retail, why should I do this? Because that means that all of those things are my job suddenly. Much like knowing the paper size, I have to know the paper size. I have to know how much paper weighs. Like this random information about paper is stuck in my head that I can't even have conversations with people about. I was like, "Oh, you on 125? Now I'm on 180. What does that mean?" Um, and that means that a lot of people just, this is their side hustle when they can, which is why you'll find a lot of number ones, but finding a number two of that same series is almost non-existent. The people who are on their issue 10s, issue 20s, moving on to volumizing their books, they said, "No, I'm doing this full time, even if it sucks for a bit, even if I have to do a little bit of client work, I will pivot back because this is my main thing." And those people are the easiest to find, because they'll save up and go to the local conventions, and then it's just a matter of, "Yo, you're the guy who did this. You're black." Is listen, there's some artists on Twitter. I find out that they're black, and I'm like, my whole life is a lie. It's a lie. And so yeah, like it's been a very steady process from no, what is it called, file open industry, cottage industry, moving from cottage industry to being able to go to a convention and saying, "Yo, there is an industry of local comics that is retailing right now." I don't want to ramble for too long because I know you have other questions, but I feel like
No,
I answered.
that is like really eye opening because what it made me realize is, you know, you're essentially like, I mean, you're doing everything on your own, whether it's obviously the story and the drawing, but then also into like the mechanics of it, like the kind of paper you're using, how big the paper is using, that kind of trial and error. So that's really interesting because that's something that I think a lot of, I mean, creatives in general, especially when we're just starting, we're kind of like, we're definitely on our own, doing things on our own. But I think that's like a different level of when you're getting into like the nitty gritty of, you're not going to like a printing company or something. You actually have to like figure out the mechanics of that yourself. So that was really interesting. Um, so you did great. um, so speaking of your work, can you talk a little bit about Captain South Africa and Razorman for those who may not be familiar? From what I saw, I think there's like two issues out, right? For each, or am
Uh,
I wrong?
I mean, being wrong is the first step to being right, so that's something. It's hard to say again because I rebooted it. I have the ability to just reboot it whenever I want. Not that I want to; it's just ease of publication. There is one volume of Captain South Africa. Um, and it's hard to it's hard to like keep track of that because sometimes I did 12 pages because that was cheaper for me, and then next time I had a little bit extra money, so I did 16 pages. So in total the first volume is 150 pages, um in color, which is, and I didn't study color theory, so coloring is the hardest part of the process for me. I'd rather work on the paper thing. And then with Razorman, that was closer to manga. And so there was almost 3 volumes out. And then I got, I don't know how to structure this sentence.
Oh my gosh,
No, it's all good.
it just went off.
Tell them I said hi. So I'm trying to work on it with other people. Like end of 2022, 2023. I'm very much in my collaboration phase, because I've been doing it alone. I know I can do it alone, but should I? um and so the both books have taken a somewhat break, especially because like I've got like bigger clients and I can't be like, oh, I don't want to work on your animated thing because I want to draw cat in South Africa. I say that with the silly voice, but those two are my babies. um Captain South Africa, I grew up reading, um Marvel and DC comics. Big fan of the Green Lantern, Wonder Woman, all of that jazz. Spider-Man especially. I think it would be remiss of me not to say that out loud. Um, and so, making a superhero comic, it was like it was tricky because the first Captain South Africa that I drew was in 2013, and he's a buff guy and buff black guy in spandex with a flag uniform. I thought I was revolutionary. You know what Marvel did that same year? They gave the shield to Sam Wilson, and I was like, okay,
Oh,
so so now that thing of like, oh, this is just black Wonder Woman. It's like this is just black Captain South Africa. Like, why? Why are you doing
you
this
should
to
have
me?
DM'd Marvel and be like, I will be expecting a check.
I will like be expecting a check. Um, and then it made me question. I was like, what am I actually doing? What am I actually adding? Oh, I'm gonna use the word I don't like. What am I adding to the zeitgeist? Ooh. What am I adding to the zeitgeist of comic books? And I had to reflect and be like, cool. What do I like that most people don't, right? Um, and it was legacy characters. For whatever reason, every day there's something about a Robin or a Flash or some black Latinx character that just there's always just beef. There's always just beef, and I like legacy characters. I think, ooh, no, I think that counts as an inflammatory statement if I say which Robin I like.
I think you could say which. I mean, you can't say anything inflammatory about a real person, but if you want to talk about
Oh,
Robin,
word. Okay, then yeah, I think that Dick Grayson is a better Batman than Bruce Wayne. All the best for the first and last episode of your podcast. Um,
and just like that, Nerds at Work with Tsunderi is no more. Thank you.
welcome. Um,
So you passed. So with Captain South Africa, you passed the baton.
Yeah, immediately because I already in my mind, like he already had a sidekick.
Mm-hmm.
She wasn't named, right? Because I'm not like again. I spent a large part of my childhood. I didn't have to make up names. I was like, you, Tim, you're in my comic now. So that process of naming the character, giving them a backstory, um, I was like, cool. So she's the main character now, and I just made him go missing. Very comic storytelling is so easy, bro. It was like, and then he left, like Avatar. He just
He
vanished.
just vanished when the world needed him
He just
most.
when the world needed him most. And so she became the Captain South Africa. But then I was like, let me not jump into this so quickly because I do want to do this full time. I want to
Mhm.
learn the ins and outs, and this is one of those outs. Like I've obviously I'm struggling with the conception phase. I think most people do.
Mhm.
Like no matter what it is, that developmental hell of trying to get it perfect before it comes out.
Mhm.
But I was like, at least let me get something. Let me say something. Um, and so at university, as you know, universities are very deeply political spaces because you just come into contact with all sorts of cultures, races, political groups, etc. Um, and at the time in South Africa, there was a lot of, you can Google this, like must fall movements. Something must fall, something must fall, something must fall. Um, and it was the champions of that movement that made me feel like maybe I'm looking at superheroes wrong. Um, and in that same breath, I was like, let me go back and read that first Captain South Africa book because his first fight was at the docks. I'm from a landlocked country. I don't have a docks. I didn't. But that's just part and parcel because I watch so many things from New York based, right? The docks is just if there's something shady happening, it's happening at the docks,
Yeah,
right?
it's very true. There's always a doc somewhere. Like I think
There's
I
always
think
a dock.
Static Shock when they all turned into like Bang Babies, it happened.
Not the
At,
bang
I think it
babies.
I think it happened at the docks. Like, now that I'm thinking about it, it always happens there, and it's never like a proper name. It's just the docks,
The
the
docks
docks, and they all know
because
what it
of
is.
because of because of nobody wants to get sued. Um,
So you had to maybe
um,
try to make it a bit more, I guess, like personal, or what's the word they're looking for? Yeah, a little
yeah,
bit more
no,
personal.
personal is the word because I was like, because I've been consuming this thing en masse, I didn't interrogate it.
Hmm.
I was like, if there's superheroes, there's docs. I was like, no, that doesn't. There's no equivalency there. They just the ones that I've been reading all happen to be from the same place. So what does my place look like, and what do superheroes look like from my cultural, my historical, my residential background? Which was difficult because the docs is just really easy to write, man. Um, and so it was looking at these must fall movements, looking at this university setting and being like, okay, cool, this is what is most interesting to me right now. Why not write this? Get out of developmental hell. The second cap South Africa, she's studied politics at university for 3 years. That's why she's that's why there's been no Captain South Africa for 3 years because he went missing. She went to uni, and then she comes back and she's armed with like all of these like talking points, right? But then I was like, if you're armed with all of those talking points, probably you're a non-violent person. Like, which again, wrote myself into a corner. Non-violent superhero, very difficult to write. No, I'm not doing this again. But it's definitely interesting. The challenge has been part of the fun where it's like, how do I resolve these big superpowered conflicts um, using what I've seen without it escalating to a point where, oh, there's a world ender? Because I've done that before. I had to kill all my friends, and we're not going back in time. Um,
Can't do that again.
and then with can no, I mean I can. That's how time, but I won't. I won't be doing it again. But the option is there. Uh, so with Razor Man, the opposite, because I first animated love was Samurai X and so on. So between Samurai X, Excel Saga, um, uh, Dirty Pair Flash, Bubblegum Crisis, so on, I could list all the '90s anime. up to and including Dragon Ball Z, um, there was a lot of shonen and a lot of just Japanese culture that I consumed, and I was just like, I like the way these stories are told, where for one, it's black and white and it's cheaper to print, but ultimately these stories, they never alienate you. You meet these characters at their lowest and you grow with them, whether they're villains or heroes or dragons or dragon hero villains, doesn't really matter. You connect with them and you just happen to be immersed in the culture. They just happen to bow and call each other san and dono and sama. And I was like, I do like that part where I want someone from the States to read Razor Man and think about the food that we eat here. I mean, we eat fries, but I want them to think about the cultural delicacies that we have and not feel like it's weird. Because there's like a level of embarrassment when you come from like an African country and you go to the States. You don't want to take out your sadza and matumbo, right? Because like there's a Big Mac there, um, and so I really wanted to make that part of the story. It's also just power systems. Like with superheroes, it's like, oh, flight, punching, super speed, whatnot. But with manga,
There's a system.
this is listen. So I don't know who I was talking about this on the TL, but are you up to date with? Doesn't even matter if you're up to date. I know you watch My Hero,
Oh
right?
yeah, yeah.
Okay, a character like Best Genius is so hype, right? This man who controls like fabric and gene threads. If he was in a Marvel DC, he would be the D list character. Worst powers, right? Because if in American comics, if it's not super strength, if you don't have 18 different powers, people don't rate you. You don't get a death battle episode. Um, but in manga, you could have the most obscure ability, and it's on the writer to make it cool. And so I was like, in Razor Man, the power system is their causes of death, right? So the characters have died and come back to life. Just to get it out the way, just to remove that tension. Um, so, obviously, if you died in a fire and you brought back, you have the ability to manifest that fire. Very easy example. The one that's a little harder is like if you died falling down a flight of stairs, how does that power manifest?
Can
And I
manipulate
was like,
stairs.
manipulate stairs. And I was just like, okay, cool. I was just starting to like, that painting,
Mhm.
the painting, the one with all the staircases with the
Yes.
different. I was like, if that's his domain expansion equivalent, I was like, yes, I'm onto something. I'm onto something. Something. I'm here. And then I was like, I got too caught up in the powers. Yeah, there was like I think like volume two, people just standing across from each other, explaining their powers. I was like, yeah, I'm a real mangaka because that's what I grew up with. People just explaining how they're gonna kill you 4 ways to Friday. So I was enjoying it, but there was no depth. Right, I didn't put the level of like character depth that I did into Camp South Africa. So now the projects going forward are there a nice happy marriage of those two things? But those are my
So
babies.
trying to
The
create
end.
like the world building, but also making sure there's focus on like character, like have it be a little bit more
Yeah.
character driven.
But the staircase guy, let me tell
That's
you.
pretty cool. Also, when you were talking about how in My Hero they have like the weirdest powers, so they got to make it cool. I always think about how there's that one hero who like his power is that tape comes out of his elbows.
Y'all always roast. You always roast him. You're not right for that.
If that was my power, I would have been furious with the powers that be. I'd be like, I get tape out of my elbows, but then I found out recently that he's actually heavily based off of Spider Man of all things,
Yeah.
which is hilarious. It's like a very interesting
Wild
jump.
concept.
Yeah, it's like, oh, instead of webs, it's just tape out of your elbows. But
It's
he but
just
he gets things done. So
he gets things done, right?
he carries his weight with the
I
tape.
don't know about Mineta though, because he's yet to show me why he's in class 1A. That's all no slander. No slander. I just
We can slander Mineta because Minetta's problem. Here's Minetta's issue: is that if he wasn't such a creep and if he kept his head in the game, his powers would actually be pretty cool. Because there are times when he's done some cool stuff, but the problem is that he focuses on the wrong things and he's a creep. He holds himself back. He's his own worst
facts.
enemy.
He's his own worst enemy.
So we talked about your beginnings as an artist and your work with Captain South Africa and Razorman. So you also do storyboarding. So how did you get into storyboarding? And then the next question is going to be how did you what is your next question? Your next question is going to be how you started working with Kugali Media. and how those opportunities come
Oh,
about?
I think those answers intertwine. But um, storyboarding, the first time I ever did storyboarding, because I saw people doing it, I was like, this is a job. Because I do this for free. Like I've been when someone says, "Can you do a quick sketch?" Like, yeah, and like people get paid for this. Y'all getting paid? Um, and so I wanted to get paid too. But I just didn't know how because again, no big entertainment companies. Yeah, for the record, there are entertainment companies. They're just not like if they can skip the storyboard process, they will, for better or for worse. And so I wanted to freelance for a bit, especially for the skill that I'm not comfortable with monetizing. I would rather do it on low stakes, like maybe do like 6 boards for you. We'll do it for $5 or whatever. Um, Commissioning people or getting commissions locally has just been a nightmare, and I've had so many red flags. I'm sure this experience is not unique to me, to anyone in Zim, to anyone in Africa, or anyone in the world. I'm sure just having a client that you DM that you met on Facebook Marketplaces, I'm sure it's always a nightmare. But I had a client ask me to do like storyboards for a soccer thing. Um, and so I said, okay, 40% upfront, 60% when I'm done, because I felt that was fair. Um, and then my bad for submitting the files, because then do you know what WhatsApp GB is?
No.
Good. You're not a criminal. WhatsApp GB is for criminals. Um, you can you can change your last scene to like any date you want. His last scene was like January 1st, 1980. Yeah. Uh,
Oh no.
yeah, no, this is where like you just ghost me, just block me, because this level of ghosting is different, bro. This level of
That's
ghosting was hurtful.
wild.
Yeah. And so I was like, let me just stick to like online clients because there's platforms that, um getting not legitimize, but they mitigate the number of times that you can be screwed over. There we go. And so I jumped on Fiverr.com, Fiverr. And I was just freelancing storyboards. So I think I did like 6 storyboards, one for a music video, maybe one for a movie. Some of them I'm like, I don't even know what I'm doing this for. This is popping. And I'm scared to ask because I'm charging $5 for this. Um, and then after that, I just didn't storyboard anymore because I felt like I had made the money that I needed to make. I got the skill. And I also didn't, because with Fiverr, it's like hyper competitive. It's a perfect market, right? So if you're not charging what everyone else is charging, no one's going to hire you. Um, and I was like, there's no way Hollywood is going to ask me to do storyboards. I'm just some poor black child in Africa. Like, why are they messaging me? If I see an international number, I get scared. Um, and after that, stuck to comic books, but I applied everything that I learned from storyboarding into my comic books. Um, and then Kugali. This is same answer. I know there's 2 questions, but it's same answer. Kugali had a podcast before they started what they do now. And I jumped on that podcast. I think I was like on 2, 3 episodes, maybe. And amazing, amazing guys. And so they knew I did comics, obviously, because they interviewed me, much like you. If you decide to hire me after this, that'll just go in line with my brand. So think about it.
The natural evolution of
Um,
things.
the natural evolution of things. And so when they kicked up their company and they were doing the anthologies that they do, you should go buy them. Not this is not product placement. I'm just telling you that they're good anthologies and you should buy them. And then they worked on something called Nani, and I think that's one of the best projects I've ever worked on.
Okay, say that again.
Um,
Nadi?
Nani is
Nani. Okay.
difficult because we're otaku and Nani means what. But type in Nani Kugali, then you'll find what you need to find. So Nani, and inking, like they asked me to ink for them, like hired me like a regular person, and like it was so much fun. It was so good. um what was funny was that they hired someone because it's a Pan-African company, obviously, so they have like different people. What was funny is that I one of my coworkers, he went to high school with me.
Oh, cool.
He was in the year below me, and his art is just whoa. Because I was the comic kid, he was the art kid, like just in general, like everything visual was him, man. My pronouns are he because he is him, like that's He built different, and then after inking, and we had such a great experience. It's like, oh, it's really nice working with each other. I was like, yeah, bro, like, why don't we do this all the time? And they were like, why don't we do this all the time? And I was like, okay. And then they sent me over a contract, and I started doing this all the time with them.
That had to have been cool from
I
going from like doing sort of like I guess like kind of like different works with Fiverr to doing something like consistent and like I guess I don't know if it was like full time, but like more full time like with like a company. That had to have been like a really cool transition.
No, very very stressful transition because I like working my own hours. Um, there was a time in my career like I slept during the day and I was awake at night because it's just easier for American clients. Like I would be waking up like maybe 2 or 3 hours ago because like this is the time where you're awake
Yeah.
slash you want edits
This
done
is
on
my lunch
something.
break technically actually.
This is your lunch, and then on your lunch break you'd be like, cool, so that magical girl comic that I commissioned you to do, here are the edits, and I'll be like, here are your edits back. What other feedback do you have? um, I don't know if I can get into the specificity of storyboarding with Kugali,
Mhm.
but what I can say is very different from freelancing. I mean, there's just no comparison working in like a production pipeline, where your boss is specialized in what they do, your peers are like industry titans. Um, the pressure to get things right the first time or the 22nd time when you've been messing up 21 times. Um, 21 is a lot. There's just a lot of pressure to get it right and to make sure that your company's brand has a certain level of quality that's associated with them. Because like when you're freelancing, if you mess up, oh, Bill just sucks. But like when you're working under a company and you suck, you're like an ambassador for your company. And so there's a lot of other things that go into it. So aside from drawing, it's just like communication skills, making sure your health is there, automating any process that needs to be automated, making sure that like your calendar, you're always checking your calendar and your emails. So I was like moving from just like checking my WhatsApps because people WhatsApp me for work to like having two email accounts and making sure that my Google Calendar and my Microsoft Teams calendar are aligned. I'm still juggling it a little bit because I'm not an office person. Obviously, I've been working from home my whole life. Um, but absolutely wonderful and transformative experience, and I would do it again and again and again. If I could storyboard full time, I probably would. Like I don't want to abandon comics, but like there, I got into comics because I was inspired by animation and anime. I didn't start reading comics until I was in high. I mean, I read my own, but I didn't start reading comics until I was in high school. So circling back to the thing that got me started is it's been self actualizing.
So when you because you're doing really big things. So with Kugali, they announced recently that obviously we can't get into the nitty gritty of it because Disney got shooters out here, but but
That's the last we hear of them.
that's the last y'all hear of me. They get me too. um, like how dare you bring this up? But that had to have been when you found out that they were working with Disney Plus, and then later on you announced that you were doing something with Netflix, which is top secret, so I won't get into it. Only tell me what you can. But because Netflix also got shooters, so
It's the same guy
it's the same
from
guy.
Fiverr.
It's the same guy. They hired the same assassin off Fiverr. What was that like when you? Now that would be a great graphic novel. Like you're an assassin on Fiverr. Like
Let me write that down real quick. 2 seconds.
I won't
What are
even
you doing?
I won't even ask for credit. Like I just want to see that happen. But what was that like when you found out that you were working like these big projects? Like that had to have been like a moment. Did it feel like it like validating, that you've spent so much time honing your craft and now you get to say, hey, I'm doing something top secret with Netflix, or I'm working with a company that's collaborating with Disney. Like did that feel validating in like your career path?
I mean, the normal answer is yes.
No, give me your answer. I want to
But
know.
oh yeah, no, it was horrifying, man. It was horrifying. Because first and foremost, imposter syndrome is real, very real. I will continue to do things that I think impress me, and at the same breath, I will struggle to answer the email. Um, like, hey, Bill, do you want to work on this thing? And I'll cry. It's scary. It's scary being not even so close to my dreams, being here and being like, oh, am I good enough to be here? Because there's like a lifetime of expectation that's built up to this point. Um, and the other half of it is that, am I good enough to be like not just like gaslighting myself and the work that I've been doing, but also there is just so much more work to do to skill up, to level up. So circling back to your previous question about like, what is it like having a local industry standard? You were asking, um, because there's no ceiling. Me and my peers are the ceiling. So like we're the best in the country, but that doesn't mean anything internationally, right? Like that is like, oh, biggest fish in the pond, but get into the ocean and see
Yeah.
that there's a kraken. There's a kraken waiting out there. The kraken is friendly, obviously, but the size is intimidating.
Mhm.
Um, and I mean, there's other things where it's like, I wish I had started sooner, because I feel like I'd be slightly farther ahead in my career. I studied commerce at university, not anything visual. I wasn't allowed to take art in high school as an elective. So I have no sense of color because I just haven't sat and been taught color. I can watch all the YouTube videos in the world, but it's not built into an intrinsic part of my foundation. Um, and it just always feels like as many steps as I take forward, I feel like I'm behind. Um, and I'm sure I'm like, boo hoo me. I'm sure everybody feels this way.
No, it
Um,
makes a lot of sense. I think that when there's we get so excited to, like, when we think about the things that we want to achieve, we get so excited for it, and then when it happens, it's like that's you realize that's only part of the battle, right? Like that's only the first half of of what you have to do. It's like now there's this pressure to maintain it, to stay where you're at, and also to advance. So it's a bit different. Like when you were talking about imposter syndrome, um I went to there's a convention in the States called DreamCon, and it's really big amongst like a lot of like black creatives and black nerds and things like that. And I went last year in July, and I knew I was going to meet up with some friends and some mutuals I'd never met in person before, and I was really excited. What I was not prepared is that when I went to DreamCon, there were people who I admired, whose work I was a huge fan of, and then they knew who I was, and I was like, excuse me. And or people like, you know people call me Eri, or some people will call me by like my full YouTube name is like TsundEri. So I will be walking around, be like, Eri TsundEri, and I'm just sitting here like, I'm like, and it's not, I'm not famous. Like if you look at my bills, they just very clearly I am not famous. But it was really cool to know that like people would come up to me like, oh, I saw your YouTube video, I love this video, I love this, I love that. And it was really amazing, and it felt really, like, for me it felt validating, but it was also like, oh my gosh, people actually watch my stuff and know what I do and want more from me, so I have to do things. And you know it was exciting. I always thought it'd be cool for people to know my stuff. But then once you realize that people know your stuff and admire you, you're like, oh, I have to make sure I keep putting out stuff of quality. So it's like, I understand where you're coming from. Basically, it's like a little intimidating and surprising, but also like it's cool too. So like I completely get it. Definitely not a boohoo moment. Definitely like a, oh, I see, I get it kind of moment. To like a smaller scale for me, but like definitely for sure.
cap, cap.
The, which actually kind of brings me to my next question. This is my, hold on. Yeah, this is like my second to last question. Maybe I'm not good at math. So, what advice do you have for people who are just starting out and want to break into, like, whether it's the comic book industry, the animation industry, especially like getting into an industry, if they're coming from a space where there isn't a whole big like outlet or industry for them to, like, they kind of have to be the forefront. Like, what advice would you give for them?
Fail. Yeah, I hope you fail. Yeah, that's my all my advice. I hope you fail. I hope you fail quickly. I hope you learn that failure is not the end. I hope that you know that lots of failures should happen throughout the day in order for you to grow. I hope that when failure comes, you get back up so fast you don't even notice. Like, oh, they shut down my project. Anyway, hi, here's my next project. That's I always hope that that happens for people, and a lot of the time is that fear of failing the first time that holds a lot of people back. There are, I'm sure, millions of bestsellers that are sitting as untitled document ones on people's laptops because they don't want their first book to suck. To mitigate that, I've used mitigate twice today. To mitigate that, I would say, right, do something smaller scale of what you want to do, right? So obviously, if you want to make graphic novels, if you want to make a podcast, if you want to make cosplay, start off with something manageable that you can complete with the least amount of effort. Fail there, right? There's low stakes in failing. If you aim for like a World of Warcraft level orc cosplay that requires you to learn crafting and a whole bunch of other fashion things, and then you buckle, you will never go to the con because you're like, nah, I don't want to, I don't want to embarrass myself. But if you start off with like a high school cosplay, that's just some uniform, you have to, sew a tie together, maybe do a ribbon. That'll help you get into the swing of starting and finishing. There is far more value in completion than perfection, and that goes across the board for everything. You were saying earlier that you don't like listen to like 2 hour podcasts. Like some people's podcasts are 5 minutes. Like most of the YouTube videos I watch are like 5 to 8 minutes because it's not my attention span. It's my attention span. No, it's my no, it's not. It's my attention span. But like, imagine how much effort it takes to make the 5 one. Learn all of that in terms of uploading quality, the file format. So learn the ins and outs of that. Fail on a very low scale, right? And then build up. So when it does come to buckling at the highest level, it's like, oh, it's not even a big deal because I know what to fix. It's not the end of the world. For this is for any industry, craft, hobby, business. Ooh, maybe not business. Don't make your company lose money. Um, I guess the advice would be, if you like, if you know you're going into an industry, this is for any high schoolers that are listening to this. If you know you're trying to go into a particular industry, choose the subjects that align with that. So if it's finance, take up that math, take up that accounting, take up that ecos, business management, and so on and so forth. That's where you fail. You fail in the school, so your teacher can be like, it's not the end. It's a zero, but it's not the end of the world, right? Like here's where read these books. So when you eventually get to the working world, it's like, okay, cool. No, I really know this scenario and what to do and what not to do. So I hope,
That's
yeah, I hope you fail.
that that was very beautiful, actually. So my final question is, where can everyone find your work? If you want to promote your social media handles, your where you can purchase your work, follow you, all that good stuff.
Man, I'm trying to. So I lost my website like halfway through last year, because of some weird stuff, man. Like my website was like spamming thousands of people with like links from Sweden. Who knows? I'm not a website person. I
Neither
was
am
just like,
I.
just shut it down. What? Well, you're asking me to stop sending spam emails. If you think I'm sending them, I'm not gonna stop. So I'm like, bro, just shut the website down.
That is hilarious. That's
Um,
terrible, but also hilarious. I'm very sorry that happened.
I can show you the emails. I was so confused, man. Um, when a government emails you like, bro, what's happening? I'm like, dog,
Oh
I'm from
man.
I'm a small boy from Africa. What?
I did not mean to open up some old wounds.
You promised you wouldn't.
I did. I promised that this would be a very like simple, chill interview. I don't sent you on an existential crisis. I don't open
Oh, I'm
an
sweating.
old wound. I'm very sorry.
I mean, the wound hasn't closed. The spam still. Anyway, so now I don't have a website right now, but I will have one. When it goes up, I'm gonna holler at you so you can help me. But it'll probably be billmasuku.com or dot something just to avoid problems in the future. But you can follow my socials. I'm mostly active on Twitter, but I say nonsense. So at Bill Masuku Art. Same thing with Instagram, Bill Masuku Art. Not so much Facebook. It's there so you can tag me, but ultimately, no. Don't
Same. I'm
don't
never
be
on
sending me
Facebook.
Facebook DMs. Yeah, don't do that. Be real. Be a real person. Um, and then you can just Google me. This interview was amazing, but if you need any other extra information, do hit up this podcast. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe. Drop down a comment below if you've got like questions for everybody involved, and hit that bell for notifications.
That was really great. Thank you. Now I was going to do my intro. You done did it for me. Or my outro. You done did it for me.
Welcome.
So that brings us to the end of the very first episode ever of Nerds at Work with TsundEri. Thank you so much, Bill Masuku, Bill Masuku. Oh my God, I think I started over your name. I'm so sorry, Bill Masuku, for taking time out of your schedule to be a guest, my first guest, amazing guest too. And yeah, so to everyone listening, thank you for tuning in. And make sure to follow me on Twitter at It's the TsundEri. My old Twitter used to be at the TsundEri. I got myself locked out of there. Don't it's
Spam
I'm not
emails.
on there anymore. So follow me on at It's the TsundEri, ITS the TsundEri on Twitter, at the TsundEri on Instagram, at the _ TsundEri on TikTok, and then you can also subscribe to my blog, TsundEri.com, and of course subscribe to my YouTube channel, TsundEri. We love a consistent brand here. So thank you guys so much for tuning in, and I will see you next time.